A cyclist who filmed and then reported a Range Rover driver for using his mobile phone whilst driving, which is in clear breach of Regulation 110, which attracts a fine and 6 penalty points on your driving licence, has himself been charged with riding a cycle on a road without due care and attention. Now, I'm not going to comment my views specifically in relation to this case because he's going to appear in court next month, but I will provide some general comments as to this general situation and what I might think. But first, let me show you the clip and I'll explain what's going on, and you can draw your own views as you see fit. Let me make this enlarged. So what's going on here is you can see in front of you there is a motorcyclist, which will become important in a moment. Behind that is a Range Rover who, as you will see if you look closely at the driver window and steering wheel area, is quite clearly, in my view, on his mobile phone. Let's have a look. So pausing here, you can see that he's got the phone in his hands and he puts it down when he realizes he's being filmed. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking that this cyclist is going in the same direction as the Range Rover. That is not the case, because if we continue, the cyclist does a complete 180 with the viewpoint of the camera and then moves over to the opposite side of the road to the Land Rover and continues in the opposite direction. And that is why he's been charged with cycling on a road without due care and attention and is due to appear in court next month. Because the police say that he was on the opposite side of the road and too close to the Range Rover. The Standard reports a Natasha Springford of Met Police in the traffic division says that the cyclist was in the middle of the road and then he's very close to the Range Rover on the opposite side of the road whilst a motorcyclist is oncoming with a passenger. She says you can see the cyclist cycling towards the oncoming motorbike that is filtering between traffic, and then suggests that the motorbike has to ride in between the cyclist that is very close to the Range Rover. And that is why he's been charged. Mr. Clifton, on the other hand, says he thinks this is ridiculous. He says, I don't know if it's malicious or incompetence. He branded the case as petty. Said that the only evidence against him is that is his own video footage, and insists that he's not on the wrong side of the road and that there was no lane markings, etc. Whilst the Range Rover driver driving in the opposite direction was fairly clearly on his mobile phone. I don't think that's in much dispute here. But let's talk some general points here. The number one thing to take away from all this is that you can be charged with your own footage. So if you supply footage to the police, regardless of whether you're reporting someone else or whatever, you can be charged if you are caught doing something wrong. So, for example, if you were driving and you were silly enough to film someone else doing something, and let's say even worse, you were speeding, then not only are you using a phone whilst driving, but you're speeding and whatever, you could be charged with all of those things yourself. So this cyclist has been charged using his own footage as the evidence against him. That might make disclosure an interesting exercise. But nonetheless, generally speaking, let's have a look at this scenario. So we've got a road with no lane markings. This is not specifically in relation to Mr. Clifton's case. This is just generally my general views on this situation. Now, if you are on the wrong side of the road, there might be a number of reasons for that. Now, aside from the argument as to whether or not he was on the wrong side of the road because of the lack of lane markings is another question. And so if there are no lane markings, there is a debate as to whether, generally speaking, you are on the wrong side of the road. But let's take a scenario where vehicles may usually be on the wrong side of the road. For example, if a vehicle is overtaking a cyclist, giving them the highway code recommended minimum distance of 1.5 meters to avoid a close pass scenario, then 1.5 meters away from the cyclist, who is probably already at least half a meter, if not a meter away from the curb, or let's say the cyclist is riding two abreast in the middle of that lane, the vehicle has then still got to give 1.5 meters clearage on, quite obviously, the opposite side of the road. Then the vehicle is most definitely going to be on the opposite, wrong side of the road. That would be a perfectly reasonable excuse for being on the wrong side of the road. They are overtaking this cyclist safely. As many do not. But that might be one reason. So what would the police do in that scenario? Clearly, I would hope they're not going to prosecute the driver for being on the wrong side of the road whilst doing a safe pass of a cyclist. But what if you are a cyclist that is filtering through traffic and happen to be on the wrong side of the lane markings because, again, you're filtering through traffic? I'm sure we've all seen motorcyclists certainly doing exactly this whilst they're weaving in and out of that middle center lane divider, and then at least half the time they might be on the wrong side of the road. No one really bats an eyelid because they're doing it slowly and they're doing it very carefully. Now, to adopt the phrasing of the Met police officer in this story, to apply it generally, if a motorcyclist were filtering through, even in the opposite direction, contraflow to the cyclist, I would expect them to be doing it slowly and carefully. And I would expect them in a general scenario to pass without incident, as it happens, it did in this case. But obviously my comments are meant generally. So generally speaking, if a motorcyclist is filtering slowly and carefully, as they are required to do, there wouldn't be any incident, and therefore no cause for alarm, regardless of a cyclist coming in the opposite direction. But this is just a warning that if you do film someone else, have a look at the footage and think, is there anything you could be accused of doing yourself? Now, as it happens, I understand that the Range Rover driver in this story was sent a warning letter for being on the phone. It does raise the question as to why they were not both prosecuted for different offences, but that's not my place to say. Let me know your thoughts and comments in the box below, and have you got any footage that you've thought about submitting and now you've had second thoughts because of what I've said in this video or what you've read in this story? Let me know. But just one final thing that comes to mind is that a lot of the comments came out of X to say that the cyclist was prosecuted because he was filming the Range Rover driver. I think that's a bit of a silly argument. I don't think that's the case at all, unless it really was malicious. But I would be bound to say that that should not be the case, that it should not be a malicious prosecution, and that he's not being prosecuted because he was filming the Range Rover driver on his phone. That would obviously be wrong, and I can't jump to that conclusion. If anything, he should obviously only be being prosecuted for the offence for which he's been charged, which is cycling without due care and attention to other road users. So I think those comments on X got a little bit out of control. But again, let me know your views in the comments below. This was an interesting one. So thank you for watching. Please do make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you next time.